HuyCon Wargaming presents TheoryHammer. This is episode 1. What is TheoryHammer? Welcome to the inaugural episode of HuyCon Wargaming presents TheoryHammer. This episode is the very first episode of a series on TheoryHammer, and I thought that what better way to start than with a very loose definition of TheoryHammer. Now, I think that as wargamers, TheoryHammer is probably the fourth great aspect of the hobby, right? You know, people say, what do you like better doing? Painting, building, slash converting, playing. It's like the fourth one, theory hammering. We're all guilty of it, and it's nothing to be to feel guilty of, really. But what I would say is that let's just talk a little bit about how I define theory hammer, how I'll be using the term theory hammer going forward, and what that means in general. So, as you can see, I don't think there's any definitive source for a definition of theory hammer. There's nobody that's going to say, yeah, the world has agreed that this is the definitive definition of theory hammer. But, of course, we can all agree that there are certain things that constitute theory hammer, right? So, number one, of course, is that, this is all in theory, right? So, really, it's an abstraction of the rules, and it's not based on it, like, okay, oh, this army won LVO, or this army won Adepticon, or this army won the London GT, right? Like, that's not theory hammer. That becomes just facts. It's like, yes, that build did really well at that particular tournament. Great. But theory hammer is much more about saying, okay, looking at what the rules are, looking at how the army plays, and the context of that in certain mission types and metas and all of that, saying, okay, well, how will this army do, right? So, and defining all of that, it's a big umbrella. Theory hammer, it includes everything. Starts with defining those parameters, controls for everything else, and really trying to make a very solid, reasoned argument about why you conclude one thing or the other in terms of, is this army any good? Or in what aspects is this thing the best in or the worst in, right? So that's what Theory Hammer is all about. Theory Hammer is trying to be very systematic, very objective to the degree it can be objective, and be based on information that's controlling for all else being equal. Well, now that we've kind of given a loose definition of theory hammer, let's just talk about why you would ever engage in theory hammer. If you're asking me, it's like, hey, why do you even talk about this stuff? Like, who cares? Just throw your stuff down on the table and like play some games and don't worry about it and have a good time. I'm like, well, that's fine. Then do that if you want. But I like playing in tournaments, and I like trying to be looking at systems and thinking about which ways are genuinely good and which ways are just, let's say, they fit my style, right? So even though I know it's not the most optimal choice, I take it just because I like it, and there's lots of that. And so I don't want to say that if you're not a competitive player, you can't apply Theory Hammer, definitely. And if you are a competitive player, I think that you have plenty of reasons to think about Theory Hammer, but it's not 100% necessary, right? So I think that definitely if you are going to be part of this hobby, you should have some level of Theory Hammer that's going on. If not for the most part, because this is a very expensive hobby, and I've made mistakes in the past in terms of purchases. There may or may not have been a 6th edition purchase of 20 Hellions that I completely regret. But, those types of things you can really avoid if you apply a proper theory hammer approach. And so, what I would say is that if you really spend some time, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but if you do spend some time really trying to evaluate things, you can gain a lot of clarity about how well something works. And then that has a trickle down effect, right? Because if you have a very clear expectation and understanding of the realities of how a unit or a model will perform in game, then when inevitably it disappoints you in some aspect, you'll be a lot more understanding of, well, this was only really a 15% chance of working, so therefore it just didn't work, and that's fine. As opposed to those people that would say, oh, well, I definitely hit on 5 ups and 5 ups, and there's another 5 up, and then therefore you should be dead. It's like, okay, wait, hold on. There's a lot of hoops there that clearly you're not appreciating, and if you just spend a little bit of time thinking about it, you will understand and be a lot less frustrated about when dice rolls go bad, right? And sometimes they actually go bad, and sometimes it's just your perception, right? So, but I think that proper theory hammering really gives you a lot more clarity in terms of understanding your army and in evaluating each unit and armies that you see. The other thing is too, if you're really applying it properly, it gives you a very systematic approach where you can think about all the different ways that things can happen and all the ways that you have to appreciate certain things from happening, right? So, like, for example, I would say that the ultimate combination of this game, of Age of Sigmar, is getting objectives. Well, getting objectives is complicated, right? So it's always a combination of mobility, offense, defense, durability, types of things like that kind of lead you to the conclusion that a unit is good or not good at getting objectives, right? So it might not be very durable, but hell, it moves fast, and so therefore it can just jump on stuff. That's a very different thing than saying, okay, this unit doesn't move very fast at all, but good luck killing it. So I think that having a systematic approach and applying Theory Hammer lets you consider all the different ways that this game kind of plays out. And then the last thing is really, so like, if you're playing games and going to tournaments, you gotta do Theory Hammer. I almost think that, like, if you're not doing that, then I don't know what you're doing, really. Because then you need to be doing that before you even go to a tournament, I think. Because you're just gonna get killed, unfortunately. Unless you have, like, just the craziest dice rolls, I think that you're just gonna get killed, right? And, the overall saying is that talk is cheap. I mean, this is the cheapest form of the hobby that you can get, right? Reading rules, which are provided for free, for the most part, is free. Thinking about how those rules work and play mechanically is also free. Everything else costs money, and takes a lot more time than Theory Hammer, right? So, to paint up a unit of 20 dudes, that's a lot of work, and that's going to take some time. But taking those rules for those 20 dudes and saying, okay, how do I evaluate their combat effectiveness, or how do I evaluate their durability? That's a very fast exercise, relatively speaking, right? So I think that this is going to be a super useful aspect of the hobby that I think everyone should be trying to engage in. So now that you're obviously 1,000% convinced that you need to be doing Theory Hammer, the question is really, when and how often should I be doing this Theory Hammer? Should it be done on a monthly basis? Should this be done yesterday? Should this be done every time there's any sort of significant change? And the answer is, of course, yes. It's going to have to be done super regularly. And that's depending on how competitive you really want to be, but I would say that if you're any sort of reasonably competitive person, you want to at least try to do okay in a tournament, then any and all times to Theory Hammer should probably be taken, to be honest. But there are definitely cases where you would prompt you to do this, right? So definitely when new rules change, right? So new books, editions, or FAQs come out, those are all kind of reasons to revisit your Theory Hammer, right? Or if you found out, hey, I thought this rule worked this way, and turns out I was completely wrong, which can happen, then you might have to revisit how you evaluated that rule before, right? So if you thought the summoning worked this way, and then oh my goodness, it's actually this, then that's going to be a big difference, right? And then the last part is really, do you feel like you're not really able to look at an army and be able to say, hey, I have a general sense of what the real threats are here, how this army works, how this will do that and that. That's an indication that you're either getting rusty or you haven't done anything. But if you're getting rusty, the best way to kind of break out of that at the very beginning is just the theory hammer the thing. Say, let me look at these rules. Let me see how good this is, right? Let me think about it in all these different aspects. And then that will help to at least break the rust, the crust of the rust, such that it can crack, and then the gears can move in your mind, and you can kind of get some practice in and really break that all through, and then say, hey, I really understand this army, right? So that's when I would recommend you Theory Hammer, which is basically all the time. Okay, so now that you're thoroughly convinced that you should be doing Theory Hammer, and that you should be doing it regularly and often, and basically as much as possible, because you're understanding that there's a lot of benefit here. It's not a lot of cost, and you know there's really not too much excuse to not do it. So the question then becomes, what are the things I can do to get the most out of this, or what are the pitfalls of that people fall into when they engage in any sort of theory hammer, whatever it be. And that's not to say that I have a perfect methodology. I just think these are some pointers that in my kind of thought process and methodology and approach, I think that I would hope that everyone try to avoid as best as possible. One thing that I think, I have a first bullet point here that says, have a defined goal and parameter set beforehand. Now, this is basically a situation where everyone starts on trying to look at a new book, let's say, and then they start reading, and they're getting real excited, and then they start basically losing it because they're thinking about this and then that and then this and this and this, and then what about this, and then and then it'd be screwed against this, and then so what I think having a defined goal and parameters set beforehand does is that it helps to focus your thinking on achieving your goals, as well as block out the kind of noise of all the different possibilities. You'll have to get to it eventually. All those different possibilities will have to be looked at. But, if you set the parameters ahead of time, you say, listen, I'm only concerned about this very specific set of things, and I'm trying to achieve this very specified goal, then you can clarify your thinking a lot in terms of what a theory hammer is trying to achieve, right? The next thing I have is really, you did the hard work of evaluating all the scrolls, the book, the allegiance abilities, artifacts, all that stuff, and then, a week passes by, and then your understanding and knowledge of it dips, and then you're in a tournament, and you're in game 3 and hour 6, and you've had 3 beers in, and you didn't sleep that much, and kind of smells, or whatever it is, and you once looked at that army that this person is playing, and that was maybe 2 months ago. That is not really going to be a situation that is going to be very conducive to just recalling things off the top of your head. Some people can do that, and I would take off my hat to them. But I know for myself, I need to remind myself exactly what are the key threats here. What is the real evaluation of this army that I've gone through the mental exercise of doing. It's at a minimum, I just need to remind myself, okay, what are the things that I need to do here, right? A lot of people, I guess, they develop that innate sense by playing a lot of games, and maybe I'm just not as good of a player, but I think that having a central place where you record your theory hammer and refer to it, and it's available, that's important to me. So that's what that bullet point is about. And then the last thing is really the pitfall that I've seen is, you've got a book, Beast of Chaos that came out, right? And everyone's hyped about, Shagots, let's say. Shagots are really cool casters that move fast and they're pretty cheap. And, I don't know if this is the case because I don't play Beats of Chaos, but, what happens sometimes is folks get super hyped. They play it in game, they get wrecked, and then they get on the internet or they tell their friends, like, oh, awful garbage, and it's like, well, okay, hold on, right? No theory gets proven or disproven off of one game, right? And so, if you really want to run your theory through, you got to run it through a lot of games, right? And sometimes it is truly the luck of the dice that is either for or against you. And the more games you play, the less that becomes a factor. So, but what happens is that people then change their valuation off of that. Then they underrate or overrate, and then it becomes so much worse. So I would say that if you're taking advantage of a TheoryHammer approach, then you cannot let you know one or two, like a small handful of like actual games or actual experiences change that evaluation, right? So you have to stick by it no matter what. That's basically, those are the key things that I think would really help you to make the most out of TheoryHammer. So that brings me now to this point here about the channel and what TheoryHammer is with respect to the channel. I'll say that the channel will continue to produce the same content it always has, which is covering tournaments from my own perspective or my teammates' perspective, largely in the Southern Ontario, New York, Eastern Ontario area, and periodically Las Vegas or wherever venues. And talking about what happened in those games, providing that coverage. And so that's not going to change. When it comes to TheoryHammer, though, I think that what's going to happen is that this is going to be a rollout, slow rollout of just my thoughts and approaches with respect to TheoryHammer and how to do that effectively. And I'm going to provide that on a periodic basis. I can't commit to a specific schedule per se. But I do want to culminate this whole series into essentially almost like sports science in a way, So if you look into the world of sports science and sports statistics, they have a very rigorous system of evaluating, and now they have very specific goals in mind. But the principles are very familiar, right? So I think I'm going to go through aspects of TheoryHammer, as well as the different kind of categories and areas, go through application of TheoryHammer in very specific areas or cases. And then and then of course, if there are any feedback or comments or questions on any video that I have, if it warrants another video, then absolutely I'll produce that as well too. So that's what the channel will be doing. Now, that's my plan for now, and if it changes, then I will let you know. But I'm excited for the future of the channel. I'm excited to explain my approach and maybe bringing a little bit more objective rigor to evaluating armies. And I hope that you find it useful and we can take this journey together. Thanks.